now. And from my own personal perspective, half that money in freedom would be a lot better than all that money in jail.
I would most certainly agree with that, and I would hope most of our listeners would agree that it's better to just get the thing over with than spend time in jail to spite the other your spouse or your soon-to-be ex-spouse.
Right. And the other thing that I mentioned in the article that I think gets overlooked is if you're in court, if you're having this fight, the most important thing you bring with you into court is your reputation and the court's belief in what you have to say. If the court thinks that you're concealing things, even if it doesn't know that for a fact, even if it can't prove that, but believes that you're hiding something, that's probably going to affect the decision you get in other areas of that trial.
Most certainly. I think without a doubt, I know in my experience, and this has to do with property matters or custody matters or any matter in your divorce, the worst thing you can do, in my opinion, when especially if you're at a trial, is to lie or to be caught in a lie or to be caught or to put your truthfulness at issue. Save that for the other party. Have your attorney attack their credibility, but that's the last thing you want to lose in any case with regard to anything when going through a divorce, most certainly. So I think that's definitely a highlight, and I think that applies across the gamut for any issue in your divorce case.
And and a simple example of that is, somebody will say, my grandma set up a trust for me, and I'm supposed to start getting some money when she dies, and she's really sick, but she's not dead now. Should I disclose that in the divorce case? Well, most likely the court's not going to divide that asset. I mean, one, it's kind of subjective.
Right.
She could change her mind on that trust. Two, she's still alive, so it's something in the future. And three, it's a gift from a family member, so it's probably non-marital property. And so a lot of people say, well, then I don't even want to mention it because I don't want to have that fight. But I think if you disclose it and then say why it's not divisible, you're enhancing your credibility with the court, because the court knows that that's something that would have been easy for you to not mention. But now you've come forth, nobody else knew about it, you've put it on the table, you're probably going to be able to protect it anyway, and now the court sees you volunteering that information. That's going to enhance your credibility in the court's eyes.
Most certainly. Now, Ken, let me play devil's advocate. I would tend to agree with what you have to say, but let me play devil's advocate here for all of our listeners or people that have read this article that say, oh, I don't think it's a good idea to disclose all my assets. I'll conceal this one thing, maybe that trust issue you just brought up, because they'll never find out. Nobody will ever find out. Or won't it really hurt me if I do disclose everything? I mean, every little thing. Or let's say they have an attorney. I mean, I wouldn't like to assume that an attorney would advise a client of this, but let's say they're going through a divorce right now and their attorney's like, you know what, we're just not going to mention that. What words of wisdom do you have for people that feel that way or are thinking that way?
Well, the first thing I would say is usually our spouses know a lot more than we maybe believe that they do. And so we have this one account that we think they don't know about. If they don't know specifically about it, they probably have some idea. So the idea that you're going to be able to conceal a plot of land that you bought with your brother to build a hunting cabin on, or a bank account that you've been squirreling money away in or something, I think is probably the chances of success are a lot lower than you think they are. Because I think your spouse probably has at least some idea that it's there, and she's going to have her attorney look into it, and if they do find it, that's when your credibility really does get hammered.
Sure, and we need to remind everyone that there are a lot of discovery tools available when going through a divorce. So there are ways to find out about things that maybe you didn't even know about. I've had a lot of cases where I've discovered property or discovered assets that my client knew nothing about, but it was very easily discoverable. So there are things in place so that the court puts things in place to keep this from happening. So your chances of thinking you can conceal these things are fairly slim to none. Now, what about, Ken, do you think, you made a comment about our spouses knowing a lot more about what we have than what we think they do. What about an asset, let's say, that both spouses forget that they have and it's not really dealt with, in the divorce decree?
And that does unfortunately happen. There's something that you just forget was there, and now after the fact you find out, oh, we didn't deal with this asset. And this is, we talked a little bit about the fact that a lot of jurisdictions are going to have a look-back rule for an after-discovered asset. And so if you're hiding that asset, you've got to hide it for the rest of your life, because if it ever gets found, there's the possibility of the court looking back. But if it's an inadvertent thing where both sides forget about it, I would recommend that you contact your attorney and have your attorney get in touch with the other side's attorney, and you figure out how we're going to divide that asset. Again, it goes to credibility. If you can be shown doing that, and I realize at this point the case is over, but I think you're still currying favor with the court, and especially if you've got children or something, the case is never 100% over. There's always a possibility that you're going to be back in front of that judge.
Most
Anything
certainly.
you do to enhance your goodwill is beneficial. At the same time, you would hope that if the other side discovers something, they're going to do the same thing. And if they don't, then they're going to have to conceal it for the rest of their lives. So I think probably it's a lot less stressful to just disclose it and divide it at that point. If everybody's forgotten about it, you're not losing out on anything, you're gaining something.
Most certainly, most certainly. Well, moving on to your second point, disclose offsetting debts. And again, the highlight kind of this section is just make sure when you're going through a divorce, disclose every debt. Any debt, whether it's from a family member or, the normal credit card or mortgage debts, disclose any debt. Can you talk just a little bit about that?
Yeah, what I had in mind when I started writing this this article with this section in particular is lots of times our clients have this, this view that they need to provide for the family. And if there's a situation that comes up where they're not doing that for a month or two, and they have to borrow money from the family, or sometimes they borrow from their retirement account or something, they don't want to admit to anyone that they've done that, because that feels like a personal failure.
Sure.
So they try and keep that close to the vest and say, just hide it and not disclose that debt to their spouse. They don't want to feel that they've failed their family. Well, now if we're in a divorce situation and we're dividing assets and debts, you absolutely have to disclose those debts, because otherwise, if the court doesn't know about them, if you keep them a well-guarded secret, you can end up getting a worse distribution than you should, because you're going to get stuck with these debts and they're not going to be taken into account. And the example I give in the article, I always like to use round numbers in my examples because it makes it easier for me. But,
and everyone else.
You got $100,000 in a retirement account, and at some point you borrow $40,000. Well, the court is probably going to divide, if you disclose everything, $60,000 of the retirement account, because that's what's there. That's the actual asset value at the time of the divorce. But if you were to not disclose that debt, you use that money to pay monthly bills or to pay off some credit cards that you'd incurred, or because you started a small business and you needed some cash flow for a couple of months, and so you try and conceal that. Well, the court thinks that there's $100,000 in that account, and so they say, okay, we're going to divide it. Your wife gets $50,000 and you get the other $50,000. Well, the problem is your $50,000 is still stuck with $40,000 in debt. So you're really getting $10,000 and your wife's getting $50,000. So by keeping that hidden, you have now cost yourself. You're the only one responsible for the debt. The situation that this comes up a lot is the small business owner who's had to go to family members because they weren't going to be able to meet payroll or pay some suppliers or something. Right. And they don't want to admit that the business isn't going as well, because they're afraid the spouse is going to say, well, then why don't you get out of the business and get a job or something like that, and this is what they love to do. And most of the time when we're dealing with a small business, we're going to have to get some sort of expert to give us a value on the business so we can determine how to divide the marital estate. Well, one of the things that they look at is your income and your expenses on that business side. So if you borrow $10,000 from your parents and it's not written down anywhere, as they're valuing the business, they look at income and expenses and they see you're paying the bills and you've got some money in the account, and they kick out a value. Well, they need to know about that $10,000 from your parents. Most likely you're going to have to pay that back. It's not going to be divided. The court's not going to make your wife pay half of it.
Right. I think that's a common thing with the whole family debt thing.
Right, yeah. They're not going to assign that to the person outside of the family. But you can hope that they take it into account and put it on the spreadsheet when you're divvying up assets and debts, and so you're going to get some other assets to compensate you for taking that debt. Or in this case, we're talking about valuing the business valuator can have a more realistic picture of what's going on with that business, because otherwise they're going to assume that your business is doing better than it is, and they're going to assume that it's worth more than it is, and that's going to cost you in the long run.